Long time no see, man. How's it going?
You guys ready to do it again?
Hey! Hey, Dustin! Hey!
Oh, let's rat! Let's
Oh.
go!
Yeah, I got some gold, man!
This is means for celebration right here. So far, this is my best day here. I finally have hope.
The steel cable as thick as a man's arm snapped with the sound of a cannon shot. A 40,000-pound dredge swung wild, a giant metal fist missing the crew by inches. This was just another Tuesday for Dustin Hurt. He was fighting a war against a canyon that seemed alive, a place that froze hydraulic lines and swallowed excavators whole. But this wasn't just about survival. It was about a $50 million prize, a legendary discovery waiting in a collapsed tunnel that hadn't seen daylight in over 100 years. The graveyard of ambition, Dustin Hurt, knew this season was different. He'd gambled before, sure, he'd bet against the weather, against failing equipment, and even against the river itself. But not all gambles are created equal. None of that compared to the canyon that stood before him. You see, the locals had a name for it, the Devil's Throat. And they said it less like a name and more like a curse. This wasn't just some valley carved by water over time. No. What many overlooked is that this was a place that felt alive, and to put it mildly, it was angry. The roar of the water never stopped, a constant bone-shaking thunder that bounced between the narrow walls, carrying stories of all the men who went in and never came back. It was a grim reminder of another miner's fate, whose final recorded words were a dark joke about the dangers before he perished in a horrible, painful event. On the old maps, it was a dead zone. Surveyors from long ago had scribbled warnings in the margins.
Ow, I never seen one blow like that. I've never once ever seen one blow like that.
No.
Unstable ground, treacherous currents, not worth the risk. It's funny when you think about it, because for a guy like Dustin, those warnings were like an invitation. He had spent way too many years chasing whispers of hidden gold, too many seasons breaking his back for just a little pay dirt. If there was even a tiny chance that this canyon held the kind of untouched fortune the old-timers spoke of, walking away just wasn't in the cards. He laid it out for his crew, plain and simple. If they could survive this place, they would come out with a legendary amount of gold. The first steps into the canyon were slow, every man on edge. The canyon walls seemed to press in on them, getting tighter and tighter the deeper they went. The ground beneath their boots was a total mess of slick boulders and loose gravel, just waiting to twist an ankle or worse. Believe it or not, the air in there is so compressed that every sound is 10 times louder. The scrape of a boot, the groan of a rope, and underneath it all, the constant violent hiss and crash of the river. It was enough to drive a person mad. Some of the crew couldn't stop talking about the last team that tried to work this ground. They'd brought in heavy equipment, even massive dredges, but they only lasted a few weeks.
I am not used to these big cliffs like this. It gets inside your head, man.
A flash flood had swallowed what was left of their camp, and their machines were now just twisted hunks of rusted metal along the riverbank, a permanent warning sign. But Dustin just pushed forward. He'd read the journals left behind by miners from almost a century ago. The desperate handwriting spoke of how the canyon seemed to swallow men whole. Those words could have scared him off, but instead they lit a fire in him. This was a challenge. He tightened his harness, double-checked his gear, and got to work. He knew that if this place didn't end them, it would make them legends. The further they went, the harder the canyon fought back. Machines were brought in one piece at a time, lowered down on screaming cables that strained under the immense weight. An excavator weighing over 40,000 pounds would sink into the mud the second it touched the ground. Hydraulic lines froze solid, choked by grit from the freezing spray. The pumps stalled constantly as the current forced silt and rock into every moving part. It felt like the canyon floor was alive, actively trying to bury them. Then the rock slides started. At first, it was just a few stones clattering off helmets, but soon entire sheets of gravel and rock began shearing off the canyon walls with no warning at all. The men would have to scatter, dropping their tools and running for cover as tons of rock came crashing down. Every single time, Dustin would do a head count, his heart pounding, waiting for the worst. And every time, they barely made it out with everyone in one piece. The moment that nearly broke them came out of nowhere. A main winch cable as thick as a man's arm snapped. The sound was like a cannon shot echoing through the canyon. A dredge easily the size of a small house swung wildly, a giant metal fist aimed at the crew. For a split second that felt like an eternity, everyone froze. The machine missed them by inches, slamming into the canyon wall and just hanging there, swaying. The men looked at Dustin, their faces pale, expecting him to finally call it quits. But retreating just wasn't in his DNA. But the real danger wasn't the canyon, it was what lay hidden beneath it. 100-year-old secret. With supplies running low and equipment breaking down, anyone else would have called the season a failure. But Dustin saw it differently. He gathered the exhausted crew and announced something that sounded completely insane. They came here for 2,000 ounces, but that wasn't enough. He was raising the goal to 3,500 ounces. The men just stared, silent. It was a move born from pure desperation or maybe pure genius. This canyon wasn't just a challenge anymore, it was a war. You see, even as the crew tried to wrap their heads around the new impossible goal, Dustin's mind was already somewhere else.
I know it looks old. Believe me, I know how bad it looks. It's smashed and it's old and it's rusted. It's got 6-wheel drive, so this is gonna be our way in and out.
He could feel it in his gut. There were unseen spaces beneath the roaring river, secrets the water was hiding. He had to see what was down there, even if it meant doing something incredibly risky. Without saying much, he called for equipment the crew had never used in conditions this hostile: submersible sonar drones. These weren't your average toys. The thing nobody tells you is that these are high-tech machines built for deep-sea mapping and cave rescues, costing upwards of $50,000 each. Lowering them into the violent current felt like a fool's errand. The drones were battered and tossed around so badly it seemed they would be ripped to pieces. But Dustin pushed them deeper, his eyes glued to the grainy images flickering onto the screens. Slowly, like a ghost appearing from the mist, the canyon floor began to take shape. And then it happened. A shockwave went through the team. The sonar revealed a void, a massive dark spot beneath the riverbed. It was a collapsed tunnel branching off from the main channel, a tunnel nobody knew existed. Get this, it wasn't just an empty space. The scans showed dense clusters beneath the rubble, shadowy shapes that could only mean one thing: mineral-rich rock sealed away under tons of stone and water. The most shocking fact is the shape was all wrong for a natural cave. It was too straight, too precise. Someone had dug this. Someone had been here before. Dustin immediately pulled out the old weather-stained journals. The pages spoke of an impossible gold drift deep under the canyon. For decades, everyone had dismissed it as a myth, a desperate story from a failed miner. Too dangerous, too deep, too unlikely. But now the screen in front of them was showing them hard proof. The three-dimensional map sketched out a passage that curved like a vein through the rock, with pockets so dense they glowed on the sonar, suggesting quartz shot through with gold. The crew argued. Some said trying to open a tunnel buried under a raging river was a fatal move. Others just stared at the map, their eyes wide, finally seeing what Dustin saw: a fortune that could rewrite all of their lives. He cut through the debate with a simple decision. They weren't going to chase tiny flakes of gold in the river anymore. They were going to open that tunnel. Whatever had stopped those miners a century ago, they were going to face it head on. The plan was reckless, absolutely nuts, but it was their only real shot at hitting the jackpot. The next few days were a blur of frantic engineering. Steel cages were lowered to reinforce the canyon's weakest points. Anchors were drilled deep into the stone. Bit by bit, the site went from a death trap to something that looked almost like a fortress. And slowly, a shaft began to open into the hidden passage. It was a hole into the past, a doorway no living person had seen in over 100 years.
We can dive off of this. Then we need to drill a bunch of rope anchors.
When they finally started the descent, the mood changed. Headlamps cut sharp cones of light into the darkness. The air grew colder, wetter with every foot they dropped, and the shaft was filled with ghosts. They found rusted lanterns still clinging to the rock, broken shovels, and corroded nails scattered like old bones. On one wall, someone had carved their initials, the edges now blurred by time. It was a silent story of the men who worked here and vanished. The tunnel plunged deeper than they expected, over 100 feet straight down into the earth. The ground was a soupy mix of mud and ice. They were trespassers here, finishing a job that had ended in failure and mystery for the men who started it. That dark, forgotten tunnel was hiding more than just history. Mile-long treasure. At the bottom of that cold, silent shaft, the beam of a flashlight caught something that made everyone stop breathing. It was quartz. Bright white veins of it, sharp against the black stone, were shimmering. At first, it just looked like a layer of frost, but as the light moved, it happened. Flecks of gold flashed back at them. The sight was so stunning it held them frozen in place. This wasn't microscopic dust, this was visible gold, actual flakes you could see with your own eyes, glimmering right there in the rock. The most shocking fact is that this is the kind of discovery miners dream of, but almost never find. A geologist on the crew dropped to his knees, his voice cracking when he spoke. This was a bonanza, the kind of legendary find that turns prospectors into kings. Those words broke the spell. A makeshift sluice was dragged into the tunnel, pieced together from whatever gear they could carry down. The men worked knee-deep in freezing black water, frantically feeding rock and sediment into the machine by hand. Their breath hung in the cold air like smoke. The rhythm was insane. Shovel, dump, wash, and repeat. Every single man was driven by the golden light shimmering in those walls. Hours just bled together. And then the first cleanup tray was lifted. It was heavy, dripping with wet black sand. And sitting in the bottom, like fire against the dark steel, was the gold. 52 ounces in a single pass. At today's prices, that's nearly $100,000 pulled out of the ground in less than a day's work. The crew erupted, their shouts echoing so loudly it felt like the whole tunnel was shaking. After all the danger, the lost equipment, and the near disasters, this was it. This was the proof that the canyon wasn't just a curse, it was real and it was richer than any of them had ever dared to imagine. Exhaustion was replaced by pure adrenaline. They pushed on, feeding more and more rock into the sluice, and every pan came out heavier than the one before.
With this new walkway system, we'll be able to get up there and we'll be able to get back in the water and start working.
For 3 relentless days, the crew ran that makeshift operation without a break. When they finally tallied up the gold, the numbers were staggering, over 2,000 ounces. In less than 72 hours, they had pulled nearly $4 million worth of gold from that one spot. It was a miracle. But the canyon wasn't done with them. The generators gave out, sputtering into silence one by one. Instead of quitting, they improvised, using hand-cranked pumps to keep the water flowing. It was brutal, back-breaking work, but it kept the sluices alive. On the 4th day, Dustin ordered more sonar scans. If they hit this much gold this fast, he needed to know what they were standing on. The results were so mind-blowing they almost didn't seem real. The quartz vein didn't just end a few feet into the shaft. It stretched. The scans traced a glowing artery of gold running for over a mile beneath the canyon floor. A single, uninterrupted river of treasure. A mile of gold is a king's ransom. But who pays the price? Many people are crazy about a story like this, and it's easy to see why. But for the people watching this, you might be wondering if all this happens overnight. Is a $50 million discovery even real? The thing is, we're missing a key detail. That massive number isn't what they pulled out in a week. It's an expert geologist's estimate of the total potential of that mile-long vein. Extracting it would take years, millions more in investment, and facing down the devil's throat every single day. The reality is that the real work and the real danger has only just begun. What many overlooked is the years of debt, failure, and life-threatening risks that led to this one moment. So the risk paid off, but was it worth the price? Would you gamble everything you have for a shot at a fortune like this? Let us know below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.